cheap smartphone versus an expensive smartphone. Okay, this is going to be a fair comparison video between one of my two experiences on these two phones. So basically, this is the video what's like spending on a cheaper smartphone versus spending on an expensive smartphone. Yeah, there are a lot of cheaper smartphones that are displaying in the Philippines right now. But what's like owning a cheaper smartphone versus owning an expensive smartphone? And this is Tech Dolphin. Stay awesome and stay tuned watching this video. So, you're browsing on the internet. Of course, browsing on some websites and then online shopping, where you can get that there are more information on the cheaper phone side, whereas the flagship phones tend to have this information. But, here it is. What does the cheaper phones offer than the flagship phones? So, we're going to talk about this based on my experiences. So the first step of our experience is unboxing. Oh, yeah, we did definitely unbox it though. But anyway, well, all of these phones are already unboxed, but let's do the summary anyway. So, first, the flagship phone. Yep, we do have the phone itself, 120 watt charger, Type-C to Type-C cable by the way, and then a clear case. No magnetic pad is not included, but it's already good benefit. But what is impressive is that the IQOO or Vivo still has that BMW card inside of it with a SIM ejector pin attached. But it's not just pretty impressive. The most impressive thing here, 120 watt charger with a Type-C to Type-C port. Flagships, or come on, it's not easy to have a charger inside of the box. Just implement it anyway. But anyway, kudos to Vivo for doing that so. Well, how about the cheap phone? Well, of course, obvious, but more interesting. Yep, the phone itself. The phone, and then a hard case. Yep, this is hard plastic case anyway from Itel. And then a 18 watt charger, USB-A to Type-C. But the most interesting part of all is that this one has earphones. Yes, for the first time in many years, we spot a smartphone that has an earphones. Wow! Mind-blowing. But, hey, don't judge the sound quality though. The sound quality is still meh for some reason. I mean, there is struggling with low notes, but the highs are okay. So it's kind of a bit thinny. So I have to rate around 7 out of 10. So when it comes to unboxing experience, yeah, there is still impressive parts on a flagship smartphone where you can still get a 120 watt charger, whereas this Itel gets an earphones. Both of them neither sounds amazing, but I'd say that they both have identical unboxing experience. Alright, impressive so far with the unboxing experiences. Now, this is where you notice the differences of these two experiences now, which is the design and the build of these two smartphones. Well, the answer? It's pretty obvious actually. The flagship phone tends to have the most premium build on these two, aluminum and glass, whereas the cheaper phones is just plastic with unique design. That's it. The design and feel of these two is kind of different. The Itel P55 5G still feels plasticky, but it feels sturdy though with no signs of creaks or whatsoever. But at least hey, the Itel P55 5G has this psychedelic something on the back, but of course at the same time with a ton of shooting star design at the back. But IQOO 13's sturdier and more look premium feel into it added some aesthetics with minimalist back with matte finish and at the same time large camera module. But when it comes to the two features between the two bodies, the Itel P55 5G still has that 3.5mm headphone jack, whereas the IQOO 13 doesn't have. But at the top, well, the Itel P55 doesn't have features on the top, whereas the IQOO 13 has that speaker and at the same time a noise cancelling microphone. But regardless of design features and the feel and build of these two, the feel of the Itel P55 5G has that 85% of that on the IQOO 13's experience. Now this is where you notice a lot of different parts that you can even experience. The display. The display is actually the main obvious here. If that's what you get, it is what you get. But cheap phones nowadays are trying to hit up a notch a little bit. The display on the cheaper phone, I have to say, it's considered passable. Viewing angles, it's decent. But here's where the Itel P55 5G really struggles, and at the same time you can notice some sacrifices. It struggles on brightness. Auto brightness is also non-existent on the Itel P55 5G because you need to adjust it manually. Despite its struggles, there is also something that Itel P55 5G also improves a little bit. Because it's not your ordinary 720p by 1612 IPS display with 500 nits of internal brightness, this thing has 90Hz, which is impressive. Now compare that to an expensive flagship phone, the improvements are pretty colossal. Because this one has a 1440p by 3168 LTPO 144Hz HDR10 Plus AMOLED display. Well, there is no argument that the IQOO 13's display is definitely better, but don't get ahead of ourselves because the Itel P55 5G does also excel in some points here. Because when idle, the LTPO panel drops naturally at 1Hz, while Itel P55 5G drops at 60Hz variable refresh rate. Though I have to tell you that the cheaper phones are getting impressive, but the gap is still huge. So I have to say that the experience of the Itel P55 5G is 95% that of the experience on the IQOO 13's experience. So you can see the significant improvement from the display, but this is where you notice the actual cost cutting of a budget smartphone. So what about the signal? Signal is very essential when we go to any places using our smartphones and to communicate. And however, you can notice the difference between the signal speeds of these two. First, with Wi-Fi, the IQOO 13 still edged out Itel P55 5G. Outside of the house, the IQOO 13 points more. Inside of the bathroom, which is an enclosed area, the IQOO 13 still edged out the P55 5G. Well, Wi-Fi signal is obvious here, but how about mobile data signal? I only use two Dito SIM cards because Dito is the only one who has 5G SA here in the Philippines. Inside my room, where the signal is enclosed, the IQOO 13 still edge out the P55 5G. Outside but still 4G network, IQOO 13 still edge out the P55 5G. Outside with 5G, the Itel P55 5G edge out the IQOO 13. And I decided to bring it on my school where the 5G SA is nearer. The IQOO 13 still edge out the P55 5G. Outside of the school, the IQOO 13 still edge out the P55 5G, and it's getting intense because we're near in the SA tower. But when it comes to 5G signals, I still lean on my IQOO more when it comes to hard-to-reach areas due to the fact it has an advanced 5G modem and at the same time all surround antennas surrounding the phone. I did a 5G test on these two smartphones using Globe and Smart, but the state of the 5G networks on Globe and Smart is not quite there since Globe and Smart uses less advanced 5G core network which is non-standalone, whereas Dito is using pure 5G core network which is standalone. Yes, Dito is much more advanced here compared to the 5G networks on this Globe and Smart. So overall, the Itel P55 5G is 66% to the IQOO 13's experience. Now when it comes to software, this is where the Itel P55 5G has gone interesting. Because when it comes to actual software experience, this is where you notice the obvious. Because when it comes to entire software experience, you will always be greeted by a lot of adverts and recommendations. Like for example, application recommendations, which is a best example of adverts, and some of the phones that has a selected advertisement, like for example, themes, and even lock screens, which is a low-key adverts. But when it comes to adverts on my Itel P55 5G, yes, there is present adverts here, which is from the Palm Store where these games were being recommended and even the top apps that are being recommended. But seriously, you can turn it off, whatever you like on that on the Palm Store. But when it comes to an actual software experience, well, to be honest with you, it's not really great, but it's not bad either. Because the Itel P55 5G is using Itel OS based on Android 13, but this is not an ordinary Android 13 you see here. This is the Android 13 Go edition, which is the lighter or stripped down version of the Android itself. Basically, they stripped down all of the features coming from the ordinary Android and then use it like a basic phone. But when it comes to my software experience, it's just pretty basic. Nothing too fancy over something on this budget phone. But at least we do have some basic features like the Itel's Ivana, which is their AI assistant. But I have to say it's pretty impressive. It's not there, but at least they are trying something. But there's one missing on this Itel P55 5G is that their optimizations were not really the best here. You can see some sluggishness on this device. which means my entire experience on this Itel P55 5G software is 91% of that on the IQOO 13's experience. Of course, it's not the software has been sacrificed here. The entire hardware of this phone is. The hardware on the Itel P55 5G is using is Dimensity 6080, which is just a mainstream chipset which is not too fancy when it comes to the hardware itself, you might notice. But the RAM on this smartphone is only 4GB of RAM, which is 4 times less of the RAM that my IQOO 13 has, which is 16GB of RAM, which means you might feel a little bit fast and sometimes a lot of sluggishness on this device. As you can see, as I open the application, you notice how slow the phone will be. But when it comes to graphics performance, like we are comparing Mobile Legends on my IQOO 13 and then the P55 5G, you notice that the P55 5G has a lot more pixelation. It is because it is reasonable because it uses 720p display. The graphics and the performance of this phone when playing the game, well, you can notice that it's not really the smoothest as you can see on playing Mobile Legends. But you can notice that even in HD, you still notice the difference between the resolution of these two. Overall, my experience on this Itel P55 5G is only 88% of that on the IQOO 13's experience. Now, how does the device last long? Well, definitely the batteries. The Itel P55 5G is using 5000 mAh battery, whereas this IQOO 13 is using 6150 mAh battery, which is quite big on the IQOO 13. But as I keep using them within a day, I thought that my Itel P55 5G will last long because this one has a less clock speed compared to my IQOO 13, which has a 4.32 GHz chipset, which is much powerful here. But it is the way opposite, because not only the IQOO 13 has 6150 mAh battery, it also houses a smarter chipset which is smart enough to be efficient and then less battery drain. Because a chipset nanometer also plays a factor when it comes to efficiency. So basically the IQOO 13 has 3 nanometers, whereas this P55 5G has 7. So basically chipset nanometers also matters when it comes to battery consumption. So this is the reason why the Itel P55 5G drains more compared to my IQOO 13. And don't forget that IQOO 13's battery is silicon carbon battery, which is why it is thinner but at the same time has more capacity compared to my Itel P55 5G. So overall, the Itel P55 5G's experience is 85% on that on the IQOO 13's experience. Let's go to how you use a smartphone to capture experiences for a lifetime. Then let's talk about the camera performance. Cameras are the most important thing in your lifetime, and of course, when it comes to camera quality, this is where everything you have to notice is quite obvious. The level phone really shocked me. The similarities in both of these pictures are quite obvious. The IQOO 13 tends to have more of the contrast, whereas the Itel P55 5G tends to have more vibrantness. Take note that photo quality does have a lot of hits and misses. Because comparing portrait modes looks like an ordinary portrait, Itel P55 5G is intensive, but when you look deeper inside, the Itel P55 5G really misses out on some of the background blur. I uploaded this on my Instagram account and my TikTok account, and to my surprise, people choose the picture A, which is the IQOO 13, because the IQOO 13 corrects where the background is and foreground is, compared to the Itel P55 5G. And then when you look at closely, the Itel P55 5G has the gap on the bokeh photo. Now you're wondering why there is a gap or a hole on the Itel P55 5G's bokeh effect. It's because the Itel P55 5G's processor is not really well advanced enough to compensate that. It has a less advanced ISP compared to IQOO's, and then the less advanced AIE processor. Take note, people sometimes change opinions. Because I compared that again to my TikTok account and the Instagram account, people prefer the Itel P55 5G's photo when it comes to bokeh. But taking a look at the photos, look at the dynamic range of both of these two, they're pretty good. And at the same time with Itel P55 5G, Itel P55 5G kind of crushes here. And if you want to test more camera capabilities, just try video. Because the video quality, you can notice the obvious quality. The Itel P55 5G is kind of shaky here since it doesn't have an EIS. Now compare that to IQOO 13, the IQOO 13 uses an EIS and at the same time OIS. The video quality is obvious here. The IQOO 13 shoots at 4K 30fps, whereas the P55 5G shoots at 2K 30fps. And take note that the video quality on the IQOO 13 tends to be more better here than the Itel P55 5G, but it's a bit close up compared to Itel P55 5G. And this is their selfie camera. Again, both shoot at 2K at Itel P55 5G and IQOO 13 at 4K 30 FPS, and you can notice that there is a lot of better dynamic range on the IQOO 13 side. So basically, we did a lot of testing in the selfie camera. As you can see, there is slight bokeh effect on the IQOO 13. The Itel P55 doesn't have it. But this is also the audio quality test if you really want to test. And when it comes to the selfie cameras, the Itel P55 5G has a good color compared to IQOO 13, which is again natural but has good vibrancy in Itel P55 5G. Dynamic range wise, Itel P55 5G tends to be crushed out. Camera qualities on these two smartphones has become more interesting to me since people has now the eyes of the beholder. Basically, people prefer the budget camera's quality over the expensive smartphones, or people prefer the camera quality on the expensive smartphones compared to budget smartphones. But then again, despite that the camera quality on the budget smartphones have become par to par with the expensive smartphones, the advancements of the camera technologies on the budget smartphones still tends to be behind, since there is still some gaps that has not been filled up, like for example, less advanced ISP, less advanced AIE, and less advanced sensors. So basically, the experience on the camera qualities on these two smartphones, I would say 87% on that on the IQOO 13's experience. Well, this is one of my toughest phones to review since they're both two smartphones have differences. At the same time, kinda interesting to me that the entry-level phones can keep up with the expensive smartphones, though they're still behind with all the limitations in the hardware and in the software, but it's kind of advancing that it could be par with the expensive smartphones. And it's kind of interesting to me that despite of all the differences, it kind of feels like it's starting to have reached the gap that it's starting to close in. So this is my opinion, and I'm sorry that I didn't upload much videos on my YouTube channel, so I will upload next time. And this is Tech Dolphin. Stay awesome and don't forget to follow for more.